The day my HOA president told me I was a threat to geological stability while wearing a floral muumuu and orthopedic sandals, I knew one of us was about to have a very bad month and it wasn't going to be me. Because when a petty tyrant starts a war over a water well with a retired Army Corps hydrogeologist, that's not confidence, that's a suicide note in pastel stationery. She was standing right on my property line like she was guarding the gates of Rome, clutching my county well permit application in one hand and a stack of violation notices in the other, her bracelets rattling while she announced to half the neighborhood that Whispering Pines Estates was a community of standards, not some backwoods free-for-all. Karen H.O. A president, self-appointed queen full-time menace, said city water was uniform, clean, and protective of property values, and my plan to drill a private well was, according to her, a direct threat to the neighborhood's aesthetic harmony and underground integrity. Which, I'll be honest, is one of the funniest sentences anybody has ever said to me after 20 years of drilling wells in actual war zones. Then she fanned out those violation notices like she was dealing cards in a crooked casino. My garden hose improperly stored my mailbox, allegedly half an inch too low, my flower bed containing unapproved perennial selection, and she told me I had until Friday before the fines started stacking daily. She wanted a spectacle, wanted the neighbors peeking through their perfect windows to see the new guy get put in his place. She wanted fear. She wanted submission. What she got was silence. I just looked at her calm as Sunday morning because I'd learned a long time ago that people like Karen feed on reaction. You yell, they win. You plead, they win faster. So I let her finish, let her enjoy her little performance. Then I said, real even. Thank you for your preliminary assessment. I'll expect the formal written denial, citing the specific covenant article that prohibits well drilling within the 10 business days required by the bylaws. Certified mail, please. And then I turned around, walked inside, and closed the door while she was still standing there, sputtering on my lawn. That's when this stopped being about water. My name's Marcus Thorne. I bought that lot because I wanted quiet edge of the development, 2 acres, good soil, good access, and most important, I already knew what sat under it. Before I even made an offer, I'd pulled county geological surveys, plat maps, recharge data, aquifer depth estimates, all of it, old habit. I spent 20 years with the Army Corps of Engineers as a hydrogeologist, finding water where maps gave up and men got desperate. I've drilled under heat, under pressure, under the kind of conditions where a failed well meant people didn't drink. So hearing Karen tell me I couldn't drill a simple residential well on my own land because it might upset the vibe of the subdivision, yeah, that landed a certain way. And here's the thing, I had read the HOA covenants too. All of them, every boring, bloated page. There was no clause banning private wells, not one. Just the usual vague language about community standards and aesthetic harmony, the kind of mushy wording power-hungry board members use like a club. Karen saw a quiet retiree and figured I'd roll over. She mistook peace for weakness. That was her first mistake. My first move wasn't to fight loud, it was to fight clean. I built a file on my computer labeled HOA Project, and broke it into folders, correspondence, documentation, legal financials, violations, witness statements. Every conversation got logged, every notice got scanned, every email got time-stamped. I sent the board a formal message documenting our lawn encounter and requesting the specific covenant authority for their denial. Crisp, polite, professional. The kind of tone that makes bad actors nervous because it sounds like Exhibit A. The certified letter came the next day, and it was exactly what I expected. Not a denial based on an actual rule because they didn't have one, but a maze. Environmental impact study, geological subsidence analysis, noise pollution projections during drilling with decibel estimates at intervals, signed consent from adjacent neighbors. It was bureaucratic intimidation dressed up as due diligence designed to make a normal homeowner throw his hands up and go back to paying the water bill. Problem was, I'm not a normal homeowner. They asked me for a geological report like I don't dream in cross-sections. I remember sitting there reading Karen's demands and actually smiling. She had handed me a checklist and dared me to outperform her ignorance. So I got to work. But while I was building the technical response, I started a second operation, people. Karen's real power wasn't rules, it was isolation. She counted on every homeowner feeling alone, embarrassed, outmatched. So I started knocking on doors. First stop was the Garcias, an elderly couple who'd been there since the subdivision was built. I brought vegetables from my garden, made small talk, and eventually asked gently how things had gone for them with the HOA. Elena Garcia's face changed immediately. You could see the years of swallowed anger rise up. She told me how Karen fined them over their window shutters, same approved paint code, same receipt, same can. But Karen decided the sheen looked wrong in sunlight and declared her eyes were the final authority. $50 a day. Threats, legal letters. They spent thousands fighting at money they didn't have to spare just to stop a lien over the color of paint. Then came the Wilsons, young couple. Sweet kid named Leo, 7 years old, wheelchair user. They asked to build a simple front ramp. Denied. Karen said it didn't fit the neighborhood's modern farmhouse aesthetic. Told them to use the garage instead. I still remember the look on Leo's dad's face while he told me that not just anger, something worse. The kind of humiliation parents feel when someone treats their child's basic dignity like a design flaw. That was the moment the whole thing changed in my head. This wasn't just petty HOA nonsense. This was cruelty with a bylaws binder. So I started collecting stories. Basketball hoop fines, memorial bench removals, sidewalk chalk called graffiti, selective enforcement, intimidation. I made a witness folder and documented everything. And while I was at it, I filed public records requests for the HOA's incorporation documents and financial statements. Because I've learned something over the years, bullies love control, and control usually leaves a paper trail. Meanwhile, I finished Karen's ridiculous checklist. I wrote a full environmental impact analysis using public USGS data. State environmental records and local hydrogeology, 40 pages cited, modeled, boring enough to cure insomnia and solid enough to hold up in court. I built a subsidence analysis showing the soil and rock composition beneath my lot and demonstrated that drilling a narrow residential well shaft would have less structural impact than planting a large tree. For noise, I got specs from the veteran-owned drilling company I planned to hire and modeled decibel attenuation at the neighboring property lines. 2 days of sound well within municipal daytime limits. I even walked adjacent neighbors through the findings in plain English before asking for consent signatures. They signed gladly because I treated them like adults instead of subjects. The final submission was 218 pages, bound, indexed, tabbed, the kind of package that says, "I came prepared and I kept receipts." In the cover letter, I mentioned politely that I had completed the analysis personally given my professional background in groundwater resource management. I sent the physical set to the HOA and a digital copy to David Chen, head of the County Water Resources Department, an old colleague who knew good science when he saw it. Karen came back mad fast. She ignored the data and attacked the source, called my analysis self-serving, and claimed it was a conflict of interest because I wrote it myself. No counter-report, no expert rebuttal, just delay. Then she escalated, publicly posting in the neighborhood Facebook group that I was trying to drill an industrial-style well that could destabilize the ground, drain the aquifer, and contaminate city water lines. Straight-up fiction. Fear bait. And that's where her grip started to slip, because she didn't know I'd already talked to people. She didn't know the Wilsons and the Garcias had seen my reports. Under her post, the comments started coming in polite at first, then sharper. What experts? Can the board share evidence? Mr. Thorne showed us the opposite. Why is there no transparency? Watching that thread was like watching a crack run through a dam. Once people realize they're not crazy and they're not alone, everything changes. Around the same time, David Chen called me laughing about my novel of a permit package, told me countyside I was golden. But the application still needed HOA sign-off or a court order. Karen's baseless objection still had procedural weight. So I went to see an attorney, Ben Carter, a specialist in HOA litigation, the kind of guy who smiles when he sees a bully overextend. I gave him the whole file. He flipped through it, looked up and said, "Marcus, this is not a legal problem. This is a work of art." Then he laid it out. HOA boards in our state had authority, yes, but not unlimited authority. They had to act reasonably. They couldn't withhold approval based on whim, vanity, or made-up speculation. Karen's conflict of interest argument was nonsense unless she had actual expert evidence to counter mine, which she didn't. And every extra threat she sent was increasing the HOA's liability. Ben told me not to sue yet. We let her build the case for us, he said, and we use her own rules to corner her. So we launched the two-pronged plan. Prong 1, legal pressure. Ben drafted a formal certified letter demanding the board provide specific evidence-based reasons for denial and identify the covenant authority they were relying on while noting their failure to produce any competent contrary evidence. It started the clock. Prong 2, the community. I drafted a petition calling for a special meeting to discuss board conduct, financial transparency, and equitable enforcement. Then I went door to door with the Garcias and Wilsons. We didn't make it Marcus and the well. We made it what it really was, a pattern, a system, a culture of abuse. It took less than 2 days to get the signatures. Karen sat at the front with her 2 board members. Karen sat at the front with her 2 board allies in a navy pantsuit trying to project control. She opened by framing the whole thing around my permit like I was the problem, and she was graciously indulging the mob. I stayed seated. When she called my name, Elena Garcia stood up instead. That woman, tiny, shaking, a little voice trembling, absolutely leveled the room. She talked about the shutter fines, the threats, the legal fees, the fear. Mr. Garcia held up the folder. Then Leo's father stood and talked about the ramp denial, about Karen calling his son's disability an eyesore in nicer words. After that, it broke wide open. Chalk fines, selective dish enforcement, harassment, story after story. Karen kept banging the gavel, yelling for order, but nobody was listening to her anymore. They were listening to each other, and that was the moment her reign actually ended before a single vote was cast. When it was finally my turn, I walked up with 1 binder and a projector. I told them straight I didn't call the meeting over my well. I called it because my well fight exposed something bigger. Then I pulled up the financials. There it was. A $20,000 annual administrative consulting payment to a company called Suburban Solutions, LLC. I clicked to the registration record, single owner Robert Fletcher, Karen's brother-in-law. No office, no staff, no visible client base besides our HOA. Then the landscaping line item, $45,000 a year for a small amount of common space. I showed invoices, then satellite images, dated, cross-referenced. Expensive upgrades on one property lined up neatly with major landscaping payments. Karen's property, patio, retaining wall, water feature, plantings. You could hear people breathing. Karen stood up screaming it was a lie. I just kept going. Then I addressed the well, calmly, no drama. I told them my career background, the regional aquifer work, the fact that I had helped map and model the exact groundwater system beneath the neighborhood. I told them a single residential well would not harm the aquifer, not by opinion, but by data. And I told them something else. Municipal water rates were likely to rise sharply over the coming years due to infrastructure and regulatory pressures, meaning water independence wasn't a threat to property values, it was a hedge for them. Then I closed the binder and said, the board has not been protecting you. It has been using your money, abusing your trust, and lying to maintain one person's power. I looked at Karen and said, your reign is over. Silence. Then Mr. Garcia stood and made a motion for a vote of no confidence in Karen and the entire board. Tim Wilson seconded before Karen could breathe. She started shouting about coups and lawyers, but one older woman in the back cited the bylaw section from memory. Quorum was present, vote allowed at a special meeting, 2/3 required. Paper ballots got passed around in an empty water pitcher. People who'd been scared for years folded those slips like they were dropping off little pieces of their fear. Final count, 28-2. Karen and Brenda voted no. Gary abstained and looked like he wanted to dissolve into the linoleum. Karen swept the table, sent papers flying, shrieked that the community would collapse without her, and stormed out. Nobody followed. Nobody even watched, because for the first time in a long time, people were looking forward instead of up at a bully. The interim board was formed right there, Mr. Garcia, Mrs. Wilson, and the bylaw woman from the back row, their first official act. They voted on my permit application, 3 hands up, unanimous approval. Next morning, I drove the signed minutes to the county office and handed them to David Chin myself. He looked at the paperwork, looked at me, grinned, and said, looks like you resolved your snag. Permit issued that afternoon. And the twist Karen never saw coming, the well fight had only been the front door. The interim board hired a forensic accountant. The numbers were bad, worse than bad. Enough to trigger an investigation by the state attorney general into Karen and her brother-in-law for embezzlement. Turns out when you spend years bullying people into silence, you start believing no one will ever read the invoices. 3 days later, Patriot Drilling rolled into Whispering Pines like a parade float for karma, big rig, veteran crew, steel diesel, and the kind of noise that sounds beautiful when it means freedom. Neighbors came outside, but not to protest. They watched. They waved. Mr. Garcia gave me a thumbs up. Leo watched from the window, smiling. 2 days later, we hit clean, strong water. Cold, clear, abundant. Better quality than the city supply after testing. When that pump went in and I turned the hose for the first time, watching water arc out across my yard in the sunlight, it felt like more than a utility upgrade. It felt like taking my life back and watching a whole neighborhood remember it had a spine. The last time I saw Karen, a moving truck was parked outside her house. She came out looking smaller somehow, like power had been the only thing holding her shape together. I was in my yard watering a new flower bed, bright defiant colors, the kind she would have called a violation. She glared at me with that same old hatred, but there was nothing behind it now. No gavel, no threats, no audience. I didn't smirk, didn't wave. I just gave her a slow nod and went back to watering my flowers with my own well water. That was enough. A few weeks later, I hosted a neighborhood barbecue. Kids laughing, people talking, Leo rolling up and down a brand new front ramp the new board approved and helped fund. Mr. Garcia at the grill in a shirt covered in parrots, telling me the forensic review had uncovered over $100,000 missing over several years. The community felt lighter. You could hear it. And standing there at sunset, I had one of those moments that sneaks up on you, the kind that feels like a lesson you should have learned earlier, but maybe only pain can teach. I spent years finding water in hard places, thinking the job was about geology. Sometimes it is. But a lot of the time, it's really about power, who controls access, who gets denied, who gets intimidated into silence. Water, permits, rules, paperwork. Those are tools. In good hands, they build life. In bad hands, they become weapons. And the truth is, most tyrants don't fall because someone stronger yells louder. They fall when ordinary people finally compare notes. So yeah, I got my well, but that wasn't the real win. The real win was watching a neighborhood stop whispering and start speaking. Now, I'm curious what you think when someone abuses a little legal authority to terrorize people. Where's the line between following the process and fighting back hard enough to end it for good? Have you ever dealt with an HOA, landlord board, or boss who acted like the rules were just a costume for control? Drop your take in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from, and if you've got a story like this, I want to hear it.